Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome Hans Hultgren today in our podcast. Hans is the leader of Genesee Academy. He's been building Data Vault, I was told, since the beginning of the century. It's almost 25 years that you've been building and using the methodology. Very pleased, very honored to have you today. You're leading an international certification and training organization, working international, not only with Data Vault, but also with ELM Ensemble Logical Modeling. So welcome, Hans, and thank you for doing this with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Thank you for having me on. This is going to be fun for sure. As you probably all know out there, Patrick Van Deven is CEO of VaultSpeed. VaultSpeed is the data automation tooling, focusing much on enterprise organizations. Been around for decades, as well as starting off as a company in consulting and getting into the software side, and now focused and growing and doubling down, as we say, on the software and really making things happen. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Hans. It's an exciting time to build software. With AI coming into the data engineering space, I'm personally convinced that AI is going to do to data engineering what it already did to software engineering last year. So we're all now building data pipelines with AI, and the big platforms are offering to normal citizens in enterprise superpowers for building whatever they want with a whole bunch of data and preparing it for AI use case. So the topic of today is really a discussion and a conversation between Hans and I on the limits, and is it a good idea? And yes, it is, but okay, it's useful. Okay, it's really helpful, but it's not complete. So where is human? Where is the decision making, and how can we build a smart harness around all those use cases? But before we dive into it, let's first, maybe Hans, I'll let you, you're the professor, the certificator, the trainer, so I'll let you explain it. You'll do it better than me. Around the terminology refresher, what are we talking about when we talk about core business concept or natural business relationship, logical models, etc.? Maybe a quick refresher for everyone on the call.
Sure. I think it's these terms have now been around for quite some time, certainly in our training and events and things like that. The delineation, which is really important on core business concept and natural business relationship versus alternative terminology, is the core business concept is a concept, an entity, a dimension if you're dimensional modeling, something that identifies a foundational component of something we work with in the business. So if we go back, 50, 60 years, we're talking person, place, thing, and event. These things have become things like concepts and entities over the years. What's happened in the world of data warehousing and enterprise data, enterprise integration, is that a lot of these, concepts have been hijacked by technical terminology. So what ends up happening is we are creating concepts not based on necessarily fully the business itself or how business is working, how people communicate, but rather with an abstraction or some other form of, technically based concept definition. So like a lot of the entities we work with. If we look at core business concept, that's a foundational business concept being used daily by the people in the organization as a business. It's how they refer to things en masse. So like the majority of the time. So things when we define customer or client or employee, product, whatever it is, it's how the business views it. And one of the ways we can consider this is that if we were able to travel back in time, which maybe SpaceX will get us there, we'll see. We'll figure out how we can do that. But if I could go back to one of the banks in Belgium that's been around since 1902, then I could actually have an ELM, ensemble logical modeling workshop with you on, I guess that would have to be chalkboards or something else, if that was around back then. And it would work just fine because the concepts we're pulling out, the core business concepts, are foundational to the business itself. the natural business relationship is really important. I think that's one where if you look at life from the perspective of having entities and relationships, if you look at graph with nodes and edges, you have a concept of how these things are related to each other. If you look at the pure business view, the natural business relationships can be n-way, as in like they're n-way relationships, meaning that multiple things have to come together, and they do come together from a business perspective simultaneously. That's a good thing. But there's also many different forms of relationships, even between the same concepts, but they're each important to maintain and keep. So these things actually then ultimately become your ensembles in a data vault model, where you have your foundational hub being the key of that, and then your relationships manifest through links. So
Yeah.
that's the short of it.
No, thank you, Hans. It's really the immutable definitions of the business: customer, buy, product, in store, pays this, gets shipped, gets received, the goods, etc. It's very tied to the workflow and the processes of the companies as well. These can change. These can be represented in multiple IT source systems. The data, the technical data, is horizontally distributed across many of those source systems. But when they get back together into the warehouse, it's really crucial to have this kind of representation of the business. Now, what AI has changed about all of that is two sides. One is the perception of the importance of this kind of modeling. Until, I would say, last year or so, it was seen by executives, the C-suite, as somewhat of an intellectual exercise. It was hard to explain how important it would be. But now that we can talk to computers in natural language using those very terms about the business, everybody can understand now that it's pretty much a smart thing to teach the computer what terms we use in the business and how they relate to one another and what they mean actually, independently of how they are technically implemented. Now, us as software vendors, our job is to take that conceptual level, very high level, high flying, the immutable definitions of the business, and connect them with the messy source systems, the SAP, Salesforce, Workday, and all those other homegrown applications that are constantly changing. And that's really the core of the topic of today. Now, we're going to talk and deep dive a bit into how can we efficiently discover this conceptual model out of, I don't know, recording conversations between business stakeholders, conducting structured interviews. How do you do it, Hans, on the field? You told me in preparing this podcast that you had really nice examples just recently on how to efficiently build this representation of the business.
Sure. And there's two sides to that. The one is how we are focused on ELM, ensemble logical modeling, which is the workshops we run, ELM workshops, where they're intended to discover and identify and then define the core business concepts and natural business relationships. And again, not looking at source systems or source technical documentation, but strictly looking at the business itself and interacting with the business. So the first part of that is the ELM workshop itself and those business interviews. And then the other side of this, if you want me to get into it now as well, is the automation part of that with AI. But we can save that for a little bit later. For now, it's interesting just to note that the I would say business mapping, concept driving, ELM workshops that we run have actually been really, I would say, super successful. If you would think about how it has been difficult to get into a business environment and try to get requirements and work with business users on a modeling charge of some kind. These things have actually been working super well because we're really just talking through what is it you do in this organization? What are the main things you work with? How can we help you tease out and define those? We have some artifacts that can help drive the conversation in a way that makes the conversation more fruitful, more meaningful, right? And how we do that, kind of getting our hands on the natural business relationships, and then we codify that and can present that in our artifacts. And that's again been working super well. And this is all prior to the AI component that we can bring up here a little bit later.
Yeah, because that's just to Hans, that's what you've been doing all along, right? You've been running these workshops for years, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. So
it's probably might be pushing 10, but it's at least 8 or 9. Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm interested in is if you would run them 8 or 9 years ago, 5 years ago, or today, is there any difference in the way you would ask your questions as to with in the back of your head the idea that you could have the transcript of the session or the output or the documents you build afterwards as input for an agent? Is there anything you changed in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, of course, it's constantly being refined. So there's elements of the question sets that may not perform as well, and it also depends on the organization. But I think in general, that conversation is pretty fluid, and it has been working relatively well. Artifacts have been refined. I think the sessions are probably smoother in how they run. I think that's definitely true. So I don't know that there's a lot of change. Well, let's just put it this way. Up until this point, again, with AI, there hasn't really been a lot of change in how those things are run. Again, the important thing being to focus on the business side. Interesting thing you alluded to is, once you have gone through a session with a business group and you've now taken some of these artifacts back and you've identified CBCs and MBRs, do you then start the next session by saying, here's your CBCs and MBRs, here's how your business works? And I would argue, and my colleague Remco would maybe think of it slightly differently, but I would argue that it's probably good to start from scratch every time, because it's really just a real live perpetual conversation about how this business works. And what you'll end up doing is arriving at the same set, hopefully. I mean, that would be the holy grail, right? It's arrive at the same set of core business concept every time you do.
Yeah. But then when we come into the automation side of it, it's when you need to connect multiple definitions of a customer that all have their legitimacy, right? They're legit, all of them. And how do we arbitrage between which one needs to be used in which pipeline or which report, etc. And that is where you really need to have a good representation to triage those and reconcile those considerations, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, our philosophy is that you maintain those that are closest to each business unit and how they communicate. So instead of hearing someone say, "Hey, we refer to this actually as a kund or something else instead of a client or a customer," and then having an IT person come in and say, "No, that's really just a involved party of a type involved party that has a class that purchases things." And you're like, well, that's not really the way we work. So we like to keep it within the realm of close to the business itself. How do they operate? And then it's up to us to reconcile those concepts with the other concepts from the different parts of the organization.
Yeah, and that is where subject matter experts and people with a deep understanding of the knowledge are the golden nuggets, really the very precious resources in the enterprise. To remember why a customer is a customer in this system and not yet in that other system, because maybe there has been no goods shipped to this particular individual yet. But you know what? Tomorrow they will receive the goods, so it's just a matter of time until the customer shows up in this other fulfillment system, etc. Those things really need a context to make it discoverable by AI and explainable as to why there are differences between reports between different segments of the business.
No, I agree 100% with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing I really liked in when we were preparing this webinar was your notion of kinetic modeling and combat situation and the fluidity around it. We should not cement those definitions.
Yeah.
And maybe also, if I can add to this and put some more AI context into it, is that until recently, those models would, it's a bit of a caricature, right? But would end up printed on an A0 format and pinned on the wall
behind us.
Yeah, very nice.
In the modeling office. It would stay there and people would be proud of it.
Yeah.
It had sometimes very little to do because time goes and entropy happens with what actually runs in production on the IT floor. Just to give you an example, we did recently an exercise with our framework to reconcile the Erwin data models that the customer had, buckets of them, just stitch them together, kind of, all right, that's the documentation of the system, yes. And then we loaded the SQL DDL statements of what was running in production. And there was a striking difference between the two, right? And inevitable. The documentation is always late, absent. This plumbing of data warehousing has been outsourced multiple times because it was considered as plumbing and not interesting. And now it's coming back in a big way because everybody wants to have AI agents and hopes to save costs or facilitate or amplify human labor. And guess what? The plumbing that is there down in the basement of the data warehouse is really the problem that needs to be solved now. So our approach is to go back to the modeling, but then automate it from the model down such that there is never again a difference between what runs in production and what the model says. Okay, but then you get a whole range of other questions, and I really look forward to hearing your views on that. Is that there's a perception when we explain that we are going to build a very rigid system, and the whole world now is about agility and fluidity, and then you get data mesh and lake house and all sorts of other concepts. Some of them are pure marketing, by the way, to give businesses the agility without doing the modeling. So how do we reconcile those two conflicting views that are sometimes fighting at the executive suite?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we've always had this in data warehousing where we're in IT and we build systems and databases, but we're not like any other project or requirement in the organization, certainly not operational ones, in that we're actually building a machine whose job it is to perpetually adapt to change. And that's been true since the inception of data warehousing and enterprise data integration initiatives. But it's always been a challenge that's been really hard to meet. And like you mentioned, things like the documentation and the codification and making the posters, and you have, this is now done, so don't touch it. Here it is, be proud of it. And one of the issues there, of course, is that it will perpetually change. There's always going to be something happening to it. And that doesn't mean that your really core foundational core business concepts, natural business relationships, won't likely stay very similar or the same for duration of time, but it's going to be all the nuance around it, the descriptions, how they interact, changes to new relationships, new concepts coming in, how do you adapt them? These are the things that are more likely to perpetually change, how they're mapped to each other, whatever. And so in a way, and now I'll bring in the AI world a little bit, is that if we're able to just effectively push button and have our documentation, and it's instantaneous because there's no one involved in having to produce it, it's there. And we can look at what we have in today's state, even if it changes tomorrow morning, we'll be able to look at it in that state and tomorrow morning as well. So it's kind of an interesting enabler for keeping up with the, as people say, working at the speed of business, right?
Yeah.
Are we able to pull that off? So it's a really interesting time where we're kind of dovetailing an awareness, which I think pretty much in GA and a lot of the people in our consortium, we've been focused on this for a decade and a half, probably, kind of a push towards something that's hard to get to. And how do we respond to that, not just agility, but just purely fluid, almost living, breathing model, like a kinetic model. And now I think the capabilities and the awareness are somewhat dovetailing. And I think this is, Patrick, where we can look at getting a little bit more into the AI, but also thinking about this is an important time where the tooling to codify that needs to be able to respond quick, get it done using predictable templates and patterns so that it can be deployed and be hardened and be useful. So that's something we could get into talking about as well.
Yes, it's a good segue. Thank you for the automation leg of what we're talking about. Just to close on what you just said, I think the reward loop for doing this exercise is really very short, because AI is going to generate this documentation automatically. So there's no effort anymore in updating a Word document, a PowerPoint, doing revisions, endless cycles around a Microsoft Office document. So that is the reward loop is there, and so there's a huge incentive to do it properly, and there's a true excitement I've seen in some of our customers to finally get this right and reap the benefits out of it. Now, to come into the automation layer, we believe that the costs of AI, resources, water, energy, but also money, is going to be a concern moving forward. And we should be careful to where we apply what kind of intelligence. And to lead a bit in what we've been doing, we've been doing automation for over 10 years without any AI into it. It's templated code, a rule-based system, 100% of the time, the same result every time again, no AI in the code path. I don't think we should use AI to redo things that are already solved and automated long ago. So where we use AI is to support the process we just described before the integration layer.
Absolutely.
Or maybe taking information out and preparing data products. But how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And this is an interesting, segue into the AI enablement with GA Modeling Assistant. And since that started about a bit over a year ago, my colleague Remco has been working quite a bit more on it at GA, and we've had a lot of interesting, I would say, observations, and it's been super interesting. The short of it is this: that if you use AI to review the business documents, let's say notes from certainly Elm workshops will be fine, but even prior to that, like just business documents, how things work in the organization, what, meeting minutes, like the Fireflies thing or whatever else is happening. So it has a basis point for understanding the elements of what's discussed and worked on in your business, again, from a business point of view. And then you also teach it, what is a CBC and an MBR? What are we looking for? What does it mean to be this natural business relationship? How do we approach that process? So you're basically creating a modeler. It does a really fantastic job. I mean, I have to say surprisingly, because it's kind of a shock. The first ones and the ones that we're working on now, that we've been working on recently, have been phenomenal. The stuff is great. So Now you're looking and saying, well, that's super interesting. Of course, you have to have the human involved in it, because when you're working in a process to, again, identify, define, to understand what these concepts are and what the relationships are, there has to be a person, a human involved in that process as well, to make sure they take that information and use it as a input for creating it. But it's been surprisingly strong, and also I would say almost collaboratively helpful. So when it is to say, for example, here's 5 things you might want to consider, or coding in, do it with 3 different approaches, which is what Remco's been doing too, which has been fascinating. So I think obviously we're not going to have AI be the only thing doing that work. But I think that's a place where we can provide and have some good support from an AI LLM, from a modeling assistant, to help you along in that process and help you to be more agile. Once you've gotten that definition and really a model or a map of a CPC MBR of a Elm modular model is really the template for automation that you can take and then toss it into a tool, and you get the arms of VaultSpeed to grasp it and say, okay, now we have the templates. We have things that are not going to say, I'm going to try this way today, and then if you ask me again tomorrow, I might do it differently. They're going to say, here's how we're going to do it. It's going to be the same every time. So you can count on that predictable result. I think that's a good marriage, those two.
Yeah. And that is where Data Vault has a new youth, a new revival, I would say. Because Data Vault was all about repeatable loading patterns for a remarkably small number of concepts and objects, hubs, links, satellites, and a few variations of them. So it's actually totally templatable. And that's why automation vendors like us and a few others have been in business for quite a while.
Yeah.
And that avoids all that hallucination in creating programs that create data, because that's the big difference between data engineering and software engineering, is that our programs create data that drives critical, business decisions or regulatory reports that get signed off by executives, and you go to jail, right? So this is a pretty serious stuff, and nobody wants any hallucination there. So I think that's the core reason why Data Vault is back to the central stage and has a great future again. That's because of AI. Now, preaching for my own shop here, so I'm going to stop here. I think we are both convinced it's going to get boring. I brought Jonas with me. I didn't introduce Jonas, but if you have followed VaultSpeed, everybody knows Jonas. Jonas is my head of solution engineering, and he will show a bit of the software to put live examples on everything we have discussed with Hans. But before we go into the demo, I want to make sure that I give the opportunity to the audience to maybe ask some questions. Anybody has a question? Mika, you're reading the chat. I think Mika is.
Yeah, I can see it as well.
Okay.
I see Remco, Hans agreed.
Okay,
or
good
not
news.
So much disagreed with you. I think it was on the should you always start from scratch part.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
And then I see Michael here. I also prefer code generation, leveraging metadata and templates deterministically. Deterministic processes like pattern-based code can leverage AI in various ways to increase velocity upstream modeling and downstream usage. That's basically exactly where we want to deploy agentic AI, right?
That's where we're all building. If we could look left and right around us, I think we all see the great future for building it that way. Now, it's interesting also to make a comment that we take it top down. That's why Hans and I, we go along so well, rather than the opposite direction, starting from automating SQL, and then trying to figure out what the model is out of the code. So
I see some.
we have here a question from Janani. If an enterprise AI what is the danger of relying on a generic public language model? Yeah.
There's a few of them.
All right. So Hans, what would you say to that?
Let's see. You're reading for the companies trying to build agility. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is that
I think the question is, what's the danger of using just plain blank LLM to do what we're talking about versus
yeah, sure.
or
Actually,
architected, engineered context store or whatever name we put on it?
yeah. Well, I think the broader topic there probably, I think, is going to be saying, look, if you need to have the human involved, the modeler that knows what they're doing, like in the case what we're working with the GA modeling assistant, the human in the loop ultimately needs to be there for distilling the CBCs and MBRs to make sure something wasn't hallucinated or something that was recommended is omitted for a reason or not, those kind of things. But it's also about integration decisions, the levels of CBC and classifications that we use, the model reconciliation between alternate models and different views, what are in the domain boundaries, and what is it that constitutes a respect for the history of the way things were being run or discussed and where it's headed now, because we have that constant change going on. So I think you're just relying on the generic LLM or one that's been built up for these purposes without the human is I think dangerous. I think you need to have it vetted by that person in the loop, and someone who's well experienced in knowing how to make that happen is I think an important job role. When it comes to whether just a generic LLM or like what we refer to the GA modeling assistant, I think it's important to have your own edition of your modeling assistant because you're explaining to it what are the elements that define how we classify what a CBC or MBR is. What is it? You have to have some kind of a knowledge library there to say, here's how it works. Here's some rules that we can feed you. Here's some source documents that you can look at to understand. And so that makes it much more useful, valuable output.
Yeah, I would add versioning, auditability, observability. I mean, the context window is not infinite. So the diversity of the sources and the concept in any decent sized business will fill the context window too fast. So you've got to store it somewhere. And as soon as you store these things, here comes multi-user, multi-team versioning,
context sharing,
sharing,
and with that the cost.
Here you go, and it becomes a new layer of software that you need. That has never been there before, actually.
No, that's why we see things like Omnigent and
that's what we're building. Okay. Remco.
Yeah, by the way,
knowledge contradiction is found in data modeling. You need to add specific knowledge guardrails to stay on track. Oh yeah, there's a lot of contradiction in the business. And contradiction that has been hidden or kept silent, or there's a lot of politics as well, to be honest. There's a lot of job protection and a bit of resistance against AI, and all of that is playing right now. Okay. But that may be the topic for another webinar.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so we have a bit of time left. So companies trying to build agility. Oh yeah, now we're back to agility in the business. So do we go domain by domain like a data mesh? Okay, or do we build a central corporate bottleneck that we call corporate governance, So why don't we role play this, Hans? I'll be for decentralized, leave me alone. I have Claude, I vibe coded my data warehouse over the weekend. Look, I have a better dashboard than I have ever had. It's 90% correct, but it's better than 0% until 2 years from now. What do you say?
I say both. I mean, I think we're looking at the old adage of, think globally, act locally, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be agile. We need to be working in our, separate domains and divisions, but at the same time, being cognizant of the bigger picture, and through good procedural componentry, as well as through some support, maybe with modeling assistance and things, we can make sure that we're always tying back to the big picture. So.
Yeah, I think there's a mandate now for velocity. Executives, these kind of projects, we count in weeks, maybe month if you get lucky. But it's never again like the 2-year 10 million project is not coming back. I don't think so. It's now way faster, and that's the only answer that will, make the two visions work together again. Is if from a central pool we can integrate, I think maybe 5% of the data, but that the 5% that everybody needs, like customer records, orders, fulfillments. And then there may be variations and things that nobody cares about in other departments. Okay, be my friend, run with it. But the core set of data that needs to be integrated once and for all is a crucial element in a good architecture. Otherwise, the company will pay the cost of that integration multiple times, and it will inevitably contradict one another because of the implicit decisions that are made in this integration layer.
Agreed. And again, the perpetual change.
Yeah. So you need a central place to manage that as well. But it needs to go fast, otherwise it will not happen. And the business will just run faster than any central data team can.
Yeah, especially today.
Yes. So is that a segue to launch Jonas and show a bit of software, Hans?
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. Let's do that.
Okay.
All right, I will need to share my screen and depend on some of the people working in the background of this webinar to make sure that it's shared. Okay, it's on stream, so you should all be able to see that. Not software yet, a quick slide overview of what we have been building at VaultSpeed, and then also show on which part of it I will zoom in for that short demo. Yeah, so we've been talking a lot around how do we use AI in data modeling, how can we leverage it to solve problems that we couldn't solve before, right? And we talked about, okay, code generation is a problem that we already knew on how to solve it, but understanding and yeah, using conversations, transcripts, documents, what have you, to codify how we model our business, yeah, that was way harder. That needed a lot of manual effort, manual modeling labor to get it done, right? And there's a whole lot of things there. The same on if you wanted to give an understanding or gain a common understanding of how a certain data product needed to be built, what the data contract was, all these things were very hard to do. I myself have been building spreadsheets, mapping documents, yeah, sometimes things that really can bore you to death on how you need to put those together. And then that was one thing. Putting it into practice and really implementing them into the warehouse was yet another one. So I think, and we passed this topic. We also had an answer from the audience that if you really want to make a difference with AI in data management, data engineering, it's not going to be in the code generation. The code generation, it being deterministic, is the safe bet still, right? And maybe at some point AI will give us 100% reliability. I think we're getting closer and closer every day. But as of today, both the cost and the additional risk, it's not a benefit.
The loading pattern of a Hultgren satellite that runs 1,000 times a day does not need any token.
No, it doesn't need any token. Tokens are expensive, even with not even if you don't even use the frontier models, it can still cost you quite a bit. We've been talking about cost, but also about energy consumption, water, and what have you. So that's not the best place to put the tokens nowadays. So that's why if you look at the image, the code generator, the core engine that generates the code that runs out of VaultSpeed, is in this thing still deterministic, right? Where we made a big difference is on how you feed it with context. And that's why we built on top this enterprise context store, as we call it. Consists of 3 layers. There is the business context, there is the implementation context, and the data product context. And yeah, they kind of speak for themselves. The business context is more tied to what we have been discussing in the beginning of the webinar, Hans, on how you can codify on how your organization really works, right? And how you can do that again and again.
And that can be an ELM method.
Can be the ELM method, and we'll give you a hint of that when I go over to the demo.
Oh, nice.
The second part is how was it implemented into the warehouse, and how are they both connected, right? Mm-hmm. Connecting the business model to the implementation of it, that's already a big thing. That was very hard to do before. Generating code for that, implementing it into the warehouse, and of course, because if you build that integrated layer, it's not yet where you need to be. You really also want to have an understanding on how to build data products. So for that, we've built something similar to what I'll show you today, but the process is quite similar. You feed it with documents, you feed it with context, you feed it with meetings, conversations, what have you, and using some of the standards that have been around for a while, but are getting more and more traction on data product standards or the data contract standards, on how to codify that as well into this enterprise context store, and then build the whole thing from source all the way to the.
That's an interesting evolution. It's more and more open source, or more and more interchangeable.
Yep.
And we come from a world where the business object universe would be proprietary software.
Yeah.
The business warehouse in SAP would have no notion of what a BO universe is, and on and on and on. And now all of that is recodified by standards that can be used in an open source world. So that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
So there's more to this. If you want more details, please contact us. The idea here is that, this is not following your ELM standards, Hans. This is just a conversation between Mark and Inge. Inge is a Dutch name. Some will maybe recognize it. But they are having a conversation exactly like the one you could have in an ELM modeling workshop. Just one person explaining to another how certain processes within the organization work. And of course, you look for, and I highlighted them in this transcript for clarity, but insurance, company, household, all these things are what becomes important in the organization. So these key or core business concepts, and the relationships between them, that's what we can capture from this document. Now, the way we interact with the enterprise context store is, and many companies are doing this in the world of AI, people build CLIs. We're back to the CLI world. And VaultSpeed is working on a more elaborate user interface, but for now, this will do. And what I've asked here in my little conversation with my agent, by the way, I'm using a Haiku model, which is not on the frontier. It's a cheaper model. That should help with the token burn. But I'm going to ask it here to analyze this transcript, the one I just showed you. So it's running through that, and it's giving me a first idea of, okay, I've read your document. There are parties, customers, policies, claims, and what have you. And it asks me, well, do you really want me, it's a draft status, do you want me to start building out these core entities from the transcript and loop them into your context store? Yes, please. Always say please, be polite. And that's when it starts doing a lot of things based on skills that we've embedded in the platform, skills that know how to read this document, how to process everything. And it comes up with a list of identities, the things that we can harvest really from the document. Also events that happen covering these core entities, right? And what I've also asked it is to help me with the extraction of some of the relations from the document, right? So it's reading the relationships as well. And then from there, it goes all the way into, well, let me all load those into your context store. And if you've done that, you can easily visualize that model. Let me clean this up a little bit and maybe zoom in on a few of them. So the policies, the coverages, the invoices, which are the events, which are the identities. This is something you can easily then throw on a screen. And that's a bit what you said, Hans, the feedback loop, or when you start the next meeting. Yeah, either you start all the way from scratch and you try to consolidate it later on, not to bias people, or you start with something that you've already built and you ask for their feedback right away. So what it does is, and that's where AI can really be a tremendous help, the feedback loop is shortened to a few minutes. Mm-hmm. And actually in the same workshop, you can already do a few iterations on, what do you guys think? Does this look correct? Yes, no, and go from there. And this is actually the first step, the top-down, the top-down strategy of VaultSpeed, where you first try and understand how the business works, codify it into a system where you can version it, where you can compare it one version to the next, one business entity to the other, really have them also, or create these interactions between them on, yeah, do we agree to disagree, or do we disagree to agree, whatever, on how this thing should look like. And then once it's codified, you can use it to automate further downstream, do your implementation, build your data products, and really deliver a warehouse in a much faster way than before.
Okay, thank you, Jonas.
No worries. I will stop sharing.
All right. So that was just a small preview of the platform, just for the modeling side, and then from there we generate the code. That's the classic VaultSpeed. But also all the orchestration, the instantiation of the data. We deliver it into the CI/CD process of the data ops team. And for another webinar, maybe we will focus on the other wing of our butterfly, which is more the downstream data products things. We have a question here.
I see one more QA, yes, from Philip.
If you already have defined a Kimball target and documented use case, on the other hand, okay, and then we have a huge core banking system as a source. Can AI help bridge the two? Well, that's typical use case, isn't it?
Yeah. So what I see is that, yeah, this is what we call the replumbing exercise, I would say. Yeah? So you have built, it's a typical exercise where you, I see banking in the context. So could be a regulatory reporting layer, something that people really rely on. In this case, maybe a regulator or some other business unit that really needs these reports day in, day out without hiccups. And how do you do a replumbing exercise without hurting what's already there? This is an exercise where it needs a lot of mapping, attribute mapping, object mapping, to figure out, okay, what we had before, how does it map into the Kimball model layer that we already had? AI can help. It's not perfect, I would say, because you do need some human guidance on how to navigate this. What is interesting, though, is once you codified the answer, you will never have to codify it again. And if you need to do another replumbing exercise somewhere down the line in the near or not so near future, you can still use that data because it's excellent training data for the models that we will use in 2, 3, 4, 6 months, I don't know, to do it again if it needs be.
Yeah. It becomes a corporate asset that you can rinse and reuse for other projects, like a BCBS 239 lineage exercise. Actually, we are working with a couple of banks not too far away from here who are migrating core banking systems, and they don't want to break the regulatory reporting layer that already runs for years, and they don't want to revisit that. That would be way too costly. So you need to find a way to change the source without breaking the output. And Data Vault is a obvious methodology for that. I'm sure, Hans, you can say a few words.
Yeah.
Tightly customers like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the thing is, this is one of the core elements of data warehousing that we've really always had, is that the changing landscape of the sources is always there. When you're working with large banks, they're going to have 50, 200, 1,000, source systems out there. Not to say every one of those is in scope, but the number of in-scope systems is definitely, it's double digit no matter what you do, right? And so if you look at the life cycle of a source being 2.5 to 3.5 years before a major version rewrite, before it's being replaced, before anyone is coming in, it's a perpetual changing out of sources that feed these things. Likewise, if you have, I think, data mart deliveries, if you've built out a massive dimensional warehouse, you're not going to be agile, right? That's just how it is. So if you're storing your data persisted in that format and you have a change, you're going to have to redo it. And so that's just how it is. If those are views on top of data that's in an agile format like Vault, then you just recast a new view. If it's really important to have the exact thing I gave you 3 months ago using the same code and templates for the dimension or for the pact itself, great, then you maintain those. I would start to argue in today's world that there's less and less of those as a percentage. That most of what we need to do is ask a question now and get those answers. And that doesn't mean that the question you're asking doesn't require 4 or 5 years of history. Maybe it does, although the vast minority of all data we pull from warehouse is using history anyway. But let's just say it does. You can still create it. Of course you can. So like, we're making the process faster and easier each time. I think the point is this crazy fluid agility we're talking about is on us, whether we accept it or not. I mean, that's the new reality for both the immediate new mark delivery that tells me the stuff I wanted to know that I thought of last night when I was at dinner. That's got to happen. The new source that just came in because I got a wild hair and decided to build out this new system, and AI helped me code it in a week. You're going to have to deal with both those. And then it's our job to figure out how you still have consistency for governance purposes. And like Sandra pointed out, if it's a government agency, then okay, here's how change is allowed to happen at what pace. And no matter what happens, you got to keep this element of what you told me before available, right? So it's not like this is trivial, but I think our path to new reality is not a question. I mean, this is what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
So.
We're proud and lucky enough to automate the global data warehouse at Thomson Reuters globally. That's a massive organization that has done a lot of acquisitions. And each acquisition brings a new zoo of source systems, aliens, with different CDC patterns, different types of records, totally different definitions of everything. I think what saved their life there is the Data Vault methodology that was advised by some smart consultants years ago.
Yeah, and just a quick point on that too. It's kind of interesting, but in class, I'm always saying, this is the best modeling pattern we have, Data Vault and Ensemble, the best modeling we have for enterprise data integration, for data warehousing, for global like analytics in an organization today, as we know of today. I mean, if we discover the new pattern that beats all tomorrow, I will have to commit to you guys here that I'll drop this as like a hot potato and go right to the new one if that's better. It's just we haven't found it yet. And today, I have to say, it's still fascinating that with the advent of AI, with these new agility requirements, with the patterns we've established, whatever, it still is optimal. And actually even more so when you consider the this kind of fluid agility thing we're looking at today. And with AI, it really is, because you're able to add additional relationships without impacting the old ones. You're able to add new concepts without impacting anything else. You're able to add new context or change it without impacting anything else. I think that's just where we are. Maybe knock on wood, we're lucky, because how often is the optimal solution the one you've had for a couple decades? Probably not always, but in this case it is.
Hans, I'm sold. I can dream of a better conclusion for our work together. Thank you so much. I mean, you really wrapped it. Thank you very much. I think it's going to be more or less the conclusion for this call. I need to make an announcement for the next webinar, which is the 18th of August. If we're lucky, we get a small button here with register here. If you click on it, that should work. That's the 18th of August. That's where there. We're doing also in July with our friends from the UK another webinar with them, but it's not hosted by us. It's hosted by them. It's going to be with business thinking. You can visit the website. You'll find us there. And I would like to really thank you, Hans. It's been a pleasure doing this with you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the nice weather in Colorado. I'm sure it's more fresh than here. It's boiling hot here in Europe. I mean, it's 6 p.m., 7 p.m. now, and
it's still over 30 degrees Celsius.
And there is no aircon in this country. We're not used to this temperatures.
We're not prepped for this. No.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Hans. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for your questions, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.